Excellent. Well, thank you everybody for coming to this unfortunate workshop that I felt the need to put out uh, in recent times. But this is Liberation Music Therapy in the time of Trump. My name is Dorian Wallace, he, him. I am a board certified music therapist, so we're going to just go through this. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge this presentation is streaming from the land of Lenape-Hoking, which is the ancestral home of the Lenape people, including the Canarsie and Muncie-speaking towns who lived in what is now known as Brooklyn, New York. The Canarsie people were stewards of this coastal region, thriving in connection with the waterways, forests, and rich ecosystems that shaped their communities and ways of life. Brooklyn, originally Lenape territory, became a site of profound change and loss through colonization, as land was forcibly taken and indigenous communities were displaced. Despite this history, the Lenape people and their descendants remain deeply connected to this land and its stories. Today, Lenape communities continue to assert their cultural identity and sovereignty, thriving in Oklahoma, Wisconsin, and Canada. So we do honor the Canarsie and Lenape peoples, their enduring legacy, and their contributions to this land's past, present, and future. In recognition of this history, this workshop is committed to supporting Indigenous-led initiatives and to fostering an ongoing relationship of respect and responsibility to this land and its original caretakers. And I did put just the map from Wikipedia of what Lenape Hoking used to look like, and also just to give insight, this is contemporary Lenape people living right now. One thing that's very horrible about white supremacy is we, maybe not individually, but we as a culture almost assume that this entire community is extinct, and that's just another dehumanizing thing that this culture does. So this is a group of Lenape people, multiple generations, that at a "We Are Still Here" event in Philadelphia. And yeah, just to be aware. So let's get this started. So introduction, my name is Dorian Wallace, he, him. I'm a board certified music therapist and composer. And my work here in New York is around carceral justice, end of life care, and cult recovery, specifically around trauma. This work has led me into spaces such as prisons, Rikers Island, Crossroads Juvenile Detention Center, as well as hospice care at Calvary Hospice. And I work with communities of survivors of systemic, cultic, and narcissistic abuse. I run a cult recovery group through the Yanya Lalich Center for Cults and Coercive Control. My guiding goal is to engage with care responsively, intentionally, and through practices that support healing rather than impose it. Over time, I developed a framework to help navigate these complex spaces with integrity, transparency, and genuine respect. So I am now sharing this framework with other liberation-oriented, trauma-informed practitioners, mental health workers, artists, activists, organizers, facilitators, and all who engage in work that centers on healing and liberation. I'll also just give a little bit of background from my personal experience, and this is not a written thing, but I grew up in a very conservative household in the Midwest of the United States, in Ohio. You know, Republican family, Republican town, just very involved in that environment. I was not politically engaged, but that was the culture I grew up in. And fast forward, ended up going to school for music, ended up dropping out of school, joined the military, US Army. I served in the Army for about 10 years. And within that period of 10 years, I had a very big deconstruction of a lot of just pieces of my life, and have just made a point to go into heavy spaces. My initial work was actually going into hate group spaces and trying to help people de-radicalize and get out of those hate groups. I've worked with Life After Hate, which is a former neo-Nazi organization that they work on getting people who, sorry, they are not a former neo-Nazi organization. They're an organization for former people who were formerly involved in those groups. And it's been just and unfortunately, I have an unfortunately unique position of working with people's in hate group, working with people involved with gang violence, working with people involved with domestic violence, cultic abuse, and there is just a lot of behavioral analysis pieces that really does help us understand. But there's also a lot of more radical and more liberation-oriented theory that we don't really apply into our field as music therapists. And so I just wanted to give some foundational stuff and then open it up to a dialogue, which we can keep in the chat if need be, because I think it's really important that we connect with like-minded people, because we're in the middle of a fascist takeover, literally, and we have a particular skill set. And so if we can utilize our skill set in the best, most productive way possible to help as many people as possible while also keeping ourselves and our families safe, then I think we should do that. So let's begin. The first thing we talk about is this is really founded in liberation philosophy. And so that's a socio-political and ethical tradition rooted in struggles against domination. It's drawing on thinkers such as Frantz Fanon, Paulo Freire, Aimé Césaire, to foreground the lived realities of oppressed peoples as sites of truth and resistance. And within liberation philosophy, there's the anti-colonial resistance, which is anytime an invading force came in and there was any kind of conflict against the invading force, that is where this comes from. This is where this starts. The Haitian Revolution, the Algerian War of Independence, the Indian independence struggle rejected imperial domination. There's also liberation theology, and this goes back to the 1960s, Latin America. There were figures like Gustavo Gutierrez and Leonardo Boff who spearheaded this movement. They utilized Christian teachings to advocate for the poor and resist dictatorships, aligning faith with revolutionary justice. A lot of Marxist theory, a lot of anarchist theory applied through working with the oppressed. There is also decolonial thought and post-colonialism. This is a lot of the best scholarship you're going to find on colonization, as well as understanding how indigenous and local epistemologies engage with one another and how it works with the larger social systems that we may be analyzing. There's also intersectional feminism. This I find to be one of the most important aspects of liberation philosophy, but this was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. This framework builds on Black feminist thought like bell hooks and Audre Lorde, and it highlights how overlapping oppressions shape experiences. And I'll just give a prime example. I am a cisgender, heteronormative, white male, and I am also from the poor poverty class. So there are conflicting experiences, and this is how everybody is. We all have these varying degrees of intersectionality, and so it's just important that we study this as mental health workers in this space. There's also critical pedagogy, which is very much famously developed by Paulo Freire in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, 1970. This approach empowers learners to become the agents of change by questioning authority, ideology, and going against what he calls the banking model of education, which is just filling yourself up with info to get a job. It's very much critical of that form of education. And this finally leads us to our home base, which is liberation psychology. This was founded by Ignacio Martin Baró in El Salvador. Just so you all know, RIP, he was murdered by the El Salvadorian army, along with 5 other Jesuit priests slash civics professors, because they were speaking up against why am I brain farting? The status quo. They were speaking up against the El Salvadorian government during the Civil War, and they were executed. But this school of thought, liberation psychology, it was founded by Ignacio Martin Baró, El Salvador, and it challenges traditional psychology's concept of neutrality. It advocates for, instead of collective healing rooted in community, as opposed to individual healing, it advocates for social justice, and it advocates for resistance to authoritarian violence. And there's really 4 core principles within all of these movements and thoughts, but it's praxis, which is the merging of critical reflection with transformative action. There is centering marginalized voices, keeping that at the center of all of our work. There is the critique of power. We must always critique power. It does not mean we always have to disagree with power, but we need to always be skeptical and criticizing it. And we need a decolonial epistemology. So yes, it's extremely important to have the foundations of therapy training that we have. You know, it's important to have HIPAA. It's important to have all of these pieces that we've developed through what we might call Western medicine or Western healing, but we also need to go into other spaces. There are other systems of knowing. There are indigenous knowledge systems that have thousands of years of very well kept information and learning and knowledge and wisdom. And so it's important that we loosen the grip on certain aspects of the human experience. We as the West, we as Western psychology therapy oriented people do not own healing. We contribute to healing, but we do not own healing. So we're going to get into liberation psychology. Liberation psychology is an emancipatory psychological framework that centers oppressed communities and confronts systemic injustice, cultural trauma, and inequality through critical reflection and transformative action. As I said earlier, it emerged in Latin America in the 1970s and 1980s in response to widespread poverty, authoritarian violence, and the limitations of traditional psychology. The movement was developed by, as I had mentioned earlier, Ignacio Martin Baró, who worked amid the brutal civil war in El Salvador, deeply inspired by liberation theology, which arose in Latin American Catholic circles in the late 60s to align Christian faith with the struggles of the poor. Liberation psychology reframed the discipline as a tool for social transformation. It is something to just be very mindful of, but it is not a liberation branch of psychology, but rather it is the psychological expression of the broader liberation philosophy. So this is a psychologically informed approach to anti-colonial, anti-capitalist, justice-oriented traditions. And this framework intersects with community psychology. It intersects with various indigenous psychologies. It intersects with various eco-psychologies. And this can really form a part of a larger effort to develop a culturally grounded, socially engaged approaches to healing, emphasizing praxis, the ongoing cycle of reflection and action. So liberation psychology, it's really about reanalyzing the concepts on how we engage with the populations that we're working with. So all of that to set up to the point on why I wanted to put this up. I've been for a couple of years really been messing with the idea of doing a CMTE on liberation music therapy. This is something that I've been writing about a lot on my Substack. It's something that I apply in my practice as a music therapist, as well as just a person walking through life. But I wanted to introduce you all to the concept of the Praxis Wheel. So this is an activist framework for safe, liberatory pathways in creative healing and communal spaces. So the Praxis Wheel, it's a conceptual tool designed to serve as a compass for therapeutic and activist work in real time. So meaning that it offers a guidance for ethical, responsive, and culturally grounded engagement in liberatory practices. So the idea behind this is that we need to remain flexible, but moving forward whenever we are working within any form of oppressed or traumatized communal environment. So this framework, it helps facilitators stay rooted in their purpose, rooted in their direction, while remaining flexible and adaptive to the community's evolving needs. So this is the Praxis Wheel. So you'll notice that it's an 8-spoke wheel with an axis at the center. So at the center of the Praxis Wheel is your axis. So this is your primary medium for engaging in the world. I'm a music therapist and I'm a composer, so music is my axis. But if you're a lawyer, that can be your axis. If you are an alternative healer, that can be your axis. If you're a psychiatrist, that can be your axis. The point is that you're centering something. Spiritual companionship, mutual aid, education, therapy, any embodied practice rooted in care, whatever it is, just make sure you are centering that as your axis. So you're using whatever your axis is to ground yourself and move forward and connecting forward. So a couple of things to think about. The wheel is always in motion. It's adaptive, it's relational, and it's progressive by design. So a few guiding principles: no spoke is more important than another. Each spoke supports and informs the others. And the structure is relational, not hierarchical. So if you have one spoke, the spoke on the exact opposite side, neither spoke is more important than the other. The spoke next to it or the spoke below it, neither is more important than the other. The last piece before we actually get into the Praxis Wheel is to make sure that you always begin with the first spoke, which is the trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive spoke. So let me just say each one of the spokes, and then I'm gonna just do a breakdown of each one, and then open it up to dialogue, however we go about doing that. So this is the first spoke is trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive. The second spoke is to be culturally relevant and identity affirming. The third spoke, oh goodness, I am pressing the button way too quickly. I used to be so good at Zoom during the pandemic. All right, sorry. The third spoke, let me do that all again. First spoke is trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive, or being trauma-sensitive. The second is culturally relevant and identity affirming. The third is accessible and nuanced participation. The fourth spoke is empathetic concern and compassionate action. The fifth spoke is embodied mindfulness. The sixth spoke is educational and transformational practices. The seventh is accountability and collective agency. The eighth is liberatory truth, understanding, and justice. So before we get into all of it, the one thing I want to point out is that this is really about building a safe environment first. If you are not trauma informed, you cannot work with any traumatized community and expect any type of healing to take place. If you do not affirm a person by their identity, by their cultural identity in a real way. Not you deciding that you've done it, but the person truly feeling supported and seen by you, the facilitator. But to get all there is that I want to point out that the seventh spoke, there is accountability and collective agency. There is, I do think we do have to ask some responsibility from our participants, from the people whom we are serving, but we cannot ask any responsibility from them if they have not been in an environment that's trauma informed, a place in which they are seen culturally and identity, a place that's accessible, a place that is empathetic and compassionate by design, a place that is mindful, a place that then offers educational and transformational practices. Once all of that has happened, then you can expect a person to be a little more in control of some of the behaviors they may do. So let's get into it. The first spoke, trauma informed and trauma sensitive. So recognize the impact of trauma on the body and integrate that awareness to foster safety, trust, and grounding. So I am hopeful that the people in this group are keeping up on just what is going on in the world of trauma studies. But it's very important that we keep aware of what is being updated in the world of trauma. And it is very much around somatic experiencing, EMDR, and discussing and understanding generative somatics. It's also important to be trauma sensitive, which is to be flexible in your practice to create emotionally and somatically safe settings that are rooted in compassion and adjusted to community members' needs. I will give you a prime example. I work in the prison system, and I have made a very intentional choice to never care if somebody shows up late. If I run a 90-minute session and they show up 70 minutes late, that's okay. I don't want to create an unsafe environment. Guess what happens after that? People end up making a larger effort to arrive on groups on time. But the point is that it's not for me. They might be late for any number of reasons. So I'm going to be trauma sensitive, no matter what. Second spoke, culturally relevant and identity affirming. So being culturally relevant is to honor and hold sacred the lived experiences, practices, and values of your community members. Culture emerges from ancestry, from community, relations, shared identities, generational experiences, spiritual traditions. But it's important to be aware that being culturally relevant does not mean seeing somebody for what they look like and thinking you've figured it out. I try to point this out. It can actually be extremely racist to show up to a group, let's say here at Rikers Island in New York City, and bring in Tupac, because that group you may be working with might be 19-year-olds, might be 18-year-olds, 17-year-olds, unfortunately, in some facilities. And they are going to hear Tupac as old person music. You know, that's music that's almost 30 years old. And if I come in and just assume that a group of Black people are going to like this music that is the most obvious music for somebody like me to hear about, that's actually a racist thing to do. And it's not culturally relevant. So you have to actually learn what your community needs are. I'll give one last example. Let me get into the identity affirming. Identity affirming is to validate each person's unique identities, stay open to differences and new perspectives, prioritize support for the marginalized voices as well as people with quieter dispositions. Sometimes people who are shy are very nervous of speaking up, and it's our job as facilitators to help and assist with that. Give a person an opportunity, not just by, do you have anything to say, but what are your thoughts on this? Something that actually pulls them in. I'm not going to give any examples actually until I get to the end of all of this. So then there's accessibility and nuanced participation. And this is accessibility, be thoughtful in setting areas, tools, and interactions to ensure that everyone can participate comfortably, regardless of ability, experience, or circumstance. Create adjustments when needed. So do not be firm in what your group is supposed to be. And I'm assuming that, you know, I'm realizing that this is a room of professionals, so I'm assuming that that is a piece of it, but this is just to kind of put it into a framework to be fluid in the way we're thinking about it. Then there's nuanced participation, and this is honor diverse ways of engaging, allowing for flexible levels of involvement based on participant needs and capacities. Be mindful of friction. Sometimes friction is healthy. There are moments in the spaces I work where a fight is about to happen seemingly, and it is actually a healthy, bonding, healing moment. And so it's just very important that we are nuanced in our way of engaging. Then there is empathetic concern and compassionate action. Empathetic concern is to recognize, feel, and care about another person or community's lived experience without judgment. I want to point out, empathy is after accessibility. Empathy is after being culturally relevant. Empathy is after being trauma informed. The reason for this is that many people in the healing professions, the caring professions, we are empathetic people by who we are. That's one reason we're drawn to this work. But it's extremely important to remember that if we have not made a safe environment for our participants, no amount of empathy is going to matter. But when we're empathetic, we have to do it with intention. And so just making sure that there is an empathetic concern, just being concerned the moment you learn about something or hear about something. And then there's compassionate action, which is to respond to suffering and injustice with deliberate and competent support, competent kindness, competent solidarity to reduce harm and stimulate healing. One thing I try to really emphasize to people, no amount of somatic experiencing exercises or breathing exercises or any of that is going to help a person heal from PTSD if they are living in a space where bombs are going off, like what's going on in Gaza, or if they're living in a place where there are people actively trying to harm them, like what happens at Rikers Island, or they are living in a place and their visa ran out and now a Gestapo could show up and send them to another country's gulag. So no amount of trauma experiencing is going to heal a person with these other aspects. So there needs to be compassionate action from us, because we can, when we have those opportunities, give a little bit of space for compassion, just to give a little bit of relief. It's not much, but it is something we have capability as emotion-centered healers. Music is very emotionally driven. Then there's embodied mindfulness, and this is, we have to stay present to bodily sensations, emotional cues, communal dynamics, and just practice grounded awareness of self and grounded awareness of others. It's important to be mindful. Just sometimes you can say something that, just based on race, ethnicity, and social class, can be completely interpreted differently. And not being mindful of those things can create unnecessary conflict. So then we get to educational and transformational practices. Educational practices, that is, we're providing intentional activities that support learning, support critical thinking, and the exchange of knowledge. These include awareness of mental health, awareness of trauma. It's good to teach people about the 4 F's of trauma. It's good to teach people about moral injury, as well as giving tools on emotional resilience, examination of systems of power, oppression, as well as liberation. And then there is the transformative practices. And this is where we engage in practices that confront internalized and structural oppression. So we're nurturing equity, healing, and liberation, meaning that if you have a group, this is your space to create that environment. And this can include somatic work, ancestral healing, communication practices, any kind of embodied or relational approach as part of the transformational practice. Now we get to accountability and collective agency, and this is center the practice on taking ownership of one's actions and their impact with a commitment to repair, growth, and integrity in relationships and community. And then collective agency, and this is the shared power. This is keeping each other in check. Shared power to shape decisions, take action, and co-create a future through mutual trust, collective voice, and cooperative effort. There's a very cool organization here in New York. They're based up in Harlem. They're called HALA, stands for How Our Lives Link All Together. They were, I may be slightly off on some of this, but they formed, they were all incarcerated together, the original founders of this nonprofit. And they had a group culture shift where they started to change language. So like instead of saying fuck you, they said thank you. And they just started to be very intentional with each other. And it really started to help just heal the whole dorm at the place they were locked up. I don't know if everybody is now out, but I know that the main guy who runs Hala, his name's Corey Green. He got his PhD in psychology. He's a psychotherapist. And he got it from NYU, and he is very, very, very much focused on teaching street level therapy. They work with the community of Harlem on the street level to work on these very practices on how collective agency can actually impact not only your own healing, but the healing of others. And so then we get to the last spoke, which is liberatory truth and understanding and justice. So liberatory truth is the pursuit of truth that centers on the lived experiences of marginalized peoples, with the dominant narratives may have erased, distorted, or muted. So a liberatory truth is, just to really clarify this, a liberatory truth is not necessarily a scientific truth, but a new understanding, a conscientious awakening, a holy crap, I did not realize this was going on this long, which is something that happened to me when I was in the military. But then there's understanding and justice, and this is the cultivation of in-depth awareness of structural harm alongside a commitment to healing, equity, and collective liberation. And yeah, I'll stop it there, but let's chat. I'm gonna hit stop share. We have two options. I can either stop the recording and we just have dialogue, or if people are comfortable, we can keep the recording on. You know what? Would you all be comfortable if I stop the recording now? I think the presentation was fine for that.
Sure.
Cool. Yeah, I'm gonna do that. Excellent. Okay, well, thank you all for listening, and